I'm Richard Sher, and once again, it's time to square off. Let's meet your panel for this week. The Prince of Debate and Rhetoric, Professor Rick Vatz. Next, one of the great professional talkers in our country, Andrew Langer is back. And we have two outstanding attorneys, Tonya Bana and Barry Gogel. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this week's Square Off, where the Supreme Court has upheld a lower court order that the Trump administration must facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Now, you'll remember, he is the Maryland man who was forcibly and wrongfully deported to El Salvador, where he's being held in a notorious prison. However, the Supreme Court told the Maryland Federal District Court judge to clarify the orders she issued in the case, which raises the question of whether the administration can and will get to keep Abrego Garcia, bring him back home. There's a hearing on this coming right up. All right. Barry, can you explain this?
Well, from what I understand, it comes down to the word effectuate. What did Judge Zinnes mean when she said the administration must effectuate this order? And can a court tell an administrative agency it must effectuate this order? Judge Zinnes is going to have to explain what she meant by effectuate and what remedy she has if the administration continues to basically be in defiance of an order from 2019 that said this man couldn't be sent to El Salvador. That's the whole issue here.
Okay.
Balance of powers between the judiciary and the executive, and can the executive just openly violate a 5-year-old order?
Tonya, what do you think about that?
Yeah, first of all, let's just say Judge Cassini is incredibly smart, Yale law graduate. She's not going to do anything that is not legally permissible. It's incredibly important to her to follow the rule of law and to do what's correct. And so was not at all surprised that the Supreme Court essentially backed her up on this. The problem is, I think that the court catering to the Trump administration included this language about her needing to clarify the order to give the Trump administration another opportunity to try to come up with some rationale for why they can't. Because let's be honest, we all know that this president has the authority to bring this man back if in fact he's still alive. You can't one day say, I'm paying them $6 million. I have a contract with them to house these people and they are going to do whatever I want. And then the next day feign that you have, feign the lack of any authority. It's just not honest. But my concern is I just hope that he's still alive, because the conditions in that facility are atrocious and inhumane, and we should be embarrassed as a country that we actually are subjecting people to such conditions.
All right, Andrew, and then Rick Vatz.
Well, listen, I think there are a lot more questions than whether or not the Trump administration is going to follow this order or what's going to happen there. There is the fundamental question as to whether or not the administration has the power to engage in the due process pursuit of these claimants, and whether or not that has to be within the United States itself or whether or not it can be done elsewhere. We're now at a place where, just 8 years ago, the Democrats were in a position where they said very explicitly that if you were a criminal, illegal alien in the United States, you should be deported. Now that is apparently not the case anymore. And then we have, the real question here at home as to whether or not this government, the executive branch, which is in charge of our national security, has the power to remove people who are not here legally who have been engaged in criminal activity.
Rick.
It's a false equivalent.
Well, the law says that the president can deport, detain, or place restrictions on those who are aligned with foreign power who might pose a national security threat. And I think that the public is supportive of the administration on this. The public sees the administration as consistently trying to help maintain the security of the United States and sees the Democrats and the judiciary as trying to put bulwarks in their place.
Tonya, why are you
This
shaking your head?
this is false equivalence. We can deport people who don't belong here. No one, I don't know anybody of any political persuasion who wants to keep violent criminal offenders who are here illegally in the country. I don't know anyone who wants to do that. So let's stop pretending that that's what this is a debate over. It's not. It is about the fact that the Trump administration took it upon itself to deport people with no due process whatsoever. They scooped people up off the street, and the vast majority of those people who are in the worst, one of the worst prison facilities in the world, there's no evidence that they've ever committed any crime. Can you imagine the horror?
That's
Someone
not true.
scoops you up off the street. And it is true. And and by the way, I thought we were going to be respectful and not interrupt people. I showed you the respect I'd asked for you to do the same for
All
me.
right.
Thank you. Scooping you off the street, and then the next thing you know, you're in a prison where you're like penned up against other people who are violent criminals for 23 hours a day. It's horrific.
Sounds like a previous war.
So-
Andrew, you raised your hand, then Barry.
Okay.
Well, listen, I raised my hand and I said it's not true because there is evidence that Abrego was committing crimes and was a violent criminal, was affiliated with MS-13. And so this idea that somehow, right, this is again, we talk about false equivalencies. Tim Walz going up on stage and making it sound like the U.S. is just willy-nilly deporting, students who are here getting graduate degrees. That's not what is happening. It is not what is happening. The fact is, every day we're seeing evidence of criminal, illegal immigrants who are being deported on a daily basis. They're putting out lists. I appreciate it, Barry, but that's the lists that are going out there. I have a tremendous respect for the concept of due process. The question then becomes, does the due process procedure need to happen within the borders of the United States? And again, coming back to the equivalence issue, right? The example I use is, the January 6th rioters, insurrectionists, what have you. Should they have been allowed to remain in the Capitol until their claims were heard, or should they have been removed and arrested and incarcerated elsewhere from the Capitol before their due process rights were considered? And the answer is no.
Barry, go ahead. Be brief.
Well, first of all, Bloomberg Law has done an analysis of these lists that if you happen to find your name on it, all of a sudden you're removed from the country, and said that less than 10% have shown any connection to this Venezuelan gang. Less than 10%. And this man, Mr. Abrego Garcia, had no connection. He's a father of 3. He's a worker. He's married to an American. And yes, this is about due process of law, but due process of law happens before there's an adverse action like being sent to a prison in Salvador.
Right.
Dr. Vatz, let me just finish if you don't mind, Rich. What you were focusing on was something, that law and order, that this is a law and order thing. And as Tonya mentioned, nobody wants violent criminals on the street, but the opposite of law and order is lawlessness. But don't confuse that with the rule of law, because the opposite of the rule of law, which Trump is trying to trumpet, so to speak, is the rule by decree. And that's what's happening here. It is a rule by decree. You find your name on a list, you're out. Forget about due process of law. Donald Trump doesn't like the water in the showers. He decrees something different. We are founded on the rule of law. The rule of law is supreme to making sure law and order is properly maintained.
Sometimes the law is unclear on these matters. I mean, you have a statement by Arthur Goldberg, for example, that the Constitution is not a suicide pact. You can always claim that the law supersedes a person's individual rights, and there's all kinds of debates as to when things happen. Marco Rubio said the other day that you've got to be able you've got to be able, when a person has a visa, to expect certain behavior in the United States. And a visa does not protect you when you break the law, and they should not be so protected. And so a lot of these things are, and also the issue of when arguments are made and when they're not made. A lot of these things are unclear, but I think the American people want to give the presumption to the government at a time at which the United States is the victim of violence and the victim of bad behavior.
The American people have always had innocent until proven guilty as our overriding protection. And you are now presuming guilt over innocence. And just because somebody has a visa. And that I don't think is something that you will stand up against.
Individual we're talking about has a record.
Hold on, Rick. Stop. Go ahead, Andrew, and then Tonya. We have to get to a break.
The problem is when over the course of 4 years, you through benign neglect or affirmative neglect, you allow 10 million people to enter this country illegally. And all of a sudden a new administration comes in and has to deal with it. We have to deal with the reality. So now we're going to completely overwhelm the court system. When you create a problem that's going to overwhelm the court system,
right,
you can't expect the executive branch to sit idly by in order to deal with the problem.
Before we go to the break, I do want to mention that China has now raised its tariffs to the same as the United States has for China, to 125%. And China said it will be effective Saturday. So we'll have to see how long this tariff war continues. And we're going to continue right after we hear from the voice of Square Off, ladies and gentlemen, Howard Mallison.
Hey, Richard. The law firm of Barry Glazer specializes in personal injury, medical malpractice, and nursing home neglect. Barry's creative TV commercials have made him very recognizable, a lot because Barry tells it like it is. And Barry and his team have an in-house doctor and nurse on staff. In fact, you should call Barry before you call the insurance company. Barry gets you top dollar from insurance companies. He's that good. So give the law firm of Barry Glazer a call at 410-547-8568 and let him know you heard about him on Square Off.
Right.
And with so many cars on the road and distracted drivers everywhere, auto accidents are happening everywhere. And if you've experienced an accident, the insurance companies also can't tell you where to take your car. That's why more and more drivers are trusting their auto repairs and maintenance to leading edge auto body and mechanical repair. They work on all makes and models and offer free pickup and delivery anywhere in the Baltimore area. So call them at 410-443-6433 or visit them at 5807 Falls Road in the heart of Mount Washington. They make your car look and run like new again. Back to you, Richard.
All right. And we take our cars, of course, to Jeff Siegel over at Leading Edge. They're terrific. That's all I can say. Now, we have a lot to cover. Democrats in Congress, they want answers. Why are books being banned at the U.S. service academies? Because President Trump has ordered the elimination of materials that could be considered advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. At the Naval Academy, they have banned 381 books, including Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings. Why the Cage Bird Sings. Tonya, what is this?
Well, that's just the last point that I wanted to make, and there's a segue between the last segment and this one, is the racism. It's the fact that the Trump administration wants to deport thousands of people who are here legally, like with the permission of our government for no reason with 30 days, is evidence that this is not about getting rid of people who are violent and a risk to the American population. It is about meat for his base. It is about the perception that we are getting rid of America. And that's really what this is about. And the same thing with respect to them banning books at the service academies. This is about catering to this kind of rabid, anti-Black, anti-people of color, anti-immigrant sentiment that fuels his base. That's what this is about. Simply, there's nothing there's no legitimate justification for banning those books, and it's clearly a violation, a free speech violation. There's like, this is views that the administration and that his base they don't agree with, and they want to silence. Period.
Let me just say that all these disputes over the years over banning books, the free speech is guaranteed in the Constitution in the sense that you can't incarcerate somebody for using speech unless they're using fighting words, and what the Supreme Court says creates problems such as that, and creates fighting.
Gotcha.
The fact is that there are all kinds of books that are not included in various environments, and the fact that you don't have every book in an environment does not mean that book is banned. Why should there's a book from 1970 called "Steal This Book" by Abby Hoffman. Now, should that book be allowed in the military academies or anywhere else? I mean,
What do you think?
I'm sorry.
What do you think your answer is?
My answer is no. That there are certain books that you don't have in certain environments because they are contrary to the culture of that area. And certainly in military academies, you don't want to fill them with books that are contrary to support of the United States or support of our fighting men.
Well, let me say that Democrats on the House Armed Services Committee call the book ban, quote, a blatant attack on the First Amendment and a clear effort to suppress academic freedom and vigor at the U.S. Naval Academy and the other academies. Who had their hand up? Barry?
I did. And I don't know that you need to say much more about it than this. In 1820, German Jewish poet Heinrich Heine wrote in his play, where they burn books, they will ultimately burn people. And that's all this is. You know, Maya Angelou's books are being taken out of the library. That's where they will erase books. They will erase people. And as the only way to combat speech, Dr. Vatz, as you well know, is more speech, not restricted speech.
Rick, he mentioned your name. Go ahead. Then
I think that's facile. The fact is that
please, I thought we weren't going to use attacks on each other.
That I think an argument is facile?
Well, yes.
Well, all right. No more facile. Drop your faciles. Go ahead, Rick.
Okay. I think your argument is incorrect. Is that all right?
Okay. That's better. Thank you.
The fact that you don't allow certain books in certain venues does not mean that you are eliminating those books from being read. It means that they are inappropriate for that particular environment, for that particular venue. And there are certain venues in which it's inappropriate. Why?
How is Maya Angelou harmful to a Naval Academy plebe?
But I'm not going to argue particular books. Do you think the communists?
Well, that's the slippery slope you stand on.
Well, I don't think it's a slippery slope at all.
All right, let's go. We're going over to Andrew now. He's waited patiently.
Let us remember what the purpose of these service academies is. Now, we can debate the relative merits of Maya Angelou as an author and whether or not in an English literature class or an American literature class she should be taught. I mean, there are authors of all nationalities, of all ethnic groups who can be taught. But let's remember the whole point of these service academies and the military generally is to break people down, treat them all equally, men, women, regardless of race, creed, color, or religion, and produce a uniform kind of officer who's out there and a uniform kind of leader. And so when you have problems like we had a couple of years ago at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, where we were literally graduating avowed Marxists whose political beliefs, shall we say, might not square with what we want in our Department of Defense and serving as officers, then maybe we take steps to limit what is available in the libraries. As Professor Vatz points out, this does not make the book not available to anybody who wants to read it generally in the same way other things. And let me just also add this just on the score of academic freedom, because it is something that I take very seriously. Again, it's a United States military academy. It is a service academy. Their curriculum is going to be prescribed by the DOD.
Tonya, let me ask you, DEI, what is the issue with DEI, and who has the power to pull certain books that they, whoever they are, determine that they should not be in their library, that the audience at that school or whatever is not appropriate for to read that book? Tonya?
Well, I mean, I think obviously Andrew's right in the sense of who has the authority to control what's in the libraries at the service academies. I imagine that he's right, that it's the Department of Defense. I don't think that that's the issue. I think the issue is, why is the administration stepping in? I mean, there hasn't been a concern, that the Department of Defense had with respect to these books being in the library before. They were there, right? So somebody made a determination that they were appropriate material for these service, academy members. So why now? This is viewpoint, a viewpoint-driven restriction, period. That is what makes it a First Amendment issue. And it's not about the fact that the material is unsuitable or that it somehow, undermines the quality of these candidates for future service. That is not the case. This is simply the Trump administration advancing their agenda, which is to essentially kind of erase Black and brown people. And you know what? Black people are Americans. We are part of American history. And the fact that, I just want to get very important, the fact that this administration wants to erase Black people from the African American Museum doesn't change the fact that Black people have made tremendous contributions to this country. And that's not going to change because the Trump administration doesn't want to hear about it or recognize it.
All right, Rick.
Let me just say that the fact that a book is in a library doesn't give the book standing. That doesn't give it a presumption. The second point I make is, for whatever it's worth, I would keep Maya Angelou in my library if I had a library or a library for students. That's why I think that focusing on a particular book is not illustrative of the issue. So there are issues that you do not want because they're contrary to the culture. Whether that particular book is an example of that, I would say you're correct. It probably is not. That's a mistake. I agree with you on that.
All right, Andrew.
Listen, I'll just go back and we're talking about viewpoint discrimination. The Biden administration was all over this when they were in power. One of my favorite examples of this was the attempted removal of the statue of William Penn from the William Penn homestead in Philadelphia, which was done because the Biden administration was against the concept of religious freedom and the promotion and protection of religious freedom. And so they went and did this. So the idea that administrations are not using their power to influence some kind of political viewpoint is it's not borne out by the past. And I think that it is, again, it's just a false statement to say that this is somehow rooted in racism or somehow rooted in trying to erase some portion of Americans' history. That is a dodge in terms of what is actually going on.
Now you rolled your eyes.
Can I just respond to that real quickly? Because what is a dodge is just every time there's a criticism of Trump and the Republicans to say, oh, but the Democrats did it too, which, on very different scales, very different circumstances. And if that's going to be the response every time, then if you didn't like it then, why are you supporting it now?
Tonya?
Also, yeah, if it's as you've described, Andrew, it was wrong and I disagree with it. I don't know that it was, but if in fact it was as you described, I would disagree with that too. And it wouldn't make what's happening now right or justifiable. And it absolutely, in terms of race, how do you justify removing all images and stories about Black people from websites about American history? Like, what's the justification for that? The fact that these are stories of American people. Like, this is not promoting an agenda. Like, the fact that Black people have been in the military and have served this country for 100 years, like, that is part of our history. It's American history. That the people happen to be Black is why the material was removed. And that's what makes it about race.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Okay. So you are assuming, of course, that it was a political appointee of the Trump administration who removed Maya Angelou's book from the Naval Academy Library or recommended that it be removed. You are assuming that it was a Trump political appointee who made the decision to scrub the Arlington National Cemetery website of these stories. You can't make that case that it was that. And I would submit that as we are involved in this chaos in Washington, D.C., and you have a lot of non-political appointees temporary appointees who are doing what they can to sow chaos in these agencies, that they are doing this on a purposeful basis to, instead of dealing with the content neutral or viewpoint neutral aspect of this, are taking it to the nth degree because they want to stir up this kind of chaos that's out there.
I agree with you.
Rick Vatz,
Great.
why do they want to stir up
Let
this?
me just say parenthetically, the argument that you can't argue that the Democrats have done this too. Well, that's a classic two-coquet argument. Sometimes it's relevant, sometimes it's not relevant.
Right.
Sometimes it's relevant when you're talking about consistency and maintaining consistency, but sometimes it has nothing to do with the issue, just to say.
We're going to stop for a moment. We have two more great sponsors, and here's Howard to tell you about them.
Thank you, Rich. You know, Dr. Kelly Gogel, a well-respected board-certified podiatrist and heel specialist, is one of our sponsors. You know, foot problems can happen at any age, and Dr. Gogel knows that the appearance of your feet matter just as much as correcting any problem you may be experiencing. And if unsightly toenails embarrass you to wear sandals or open-toed shoes, you may be a candidate for laser treatments that can solve this issue. They're safe, painless, and go right to the cause. And believe me, over-the-counter treatments don't work. So give Dr. Gogel a call at 410-753-4422 and set up an appointment. You know, Baltimore is a great diner town, and the Double T diners are always voted #1 in reader polls. TT stands for totally terrific. For breakfast, lunch, or dinner, you can't beat the enormous menu selections that will bring you back again and again. There's Double T locations on Route 40 West, Perry Hall, White Marsh, Bel Air, Laurel, Annapolis, Pasadena, and the EC Diner in Ellicott City. Plus, try By the Docks in Middle River for their Monday night lobster specials. All part of the Double T family. Tell them you heard about them on Square Off. Back to you, Rich.
Do that. And Rick Vatz, you gave a thumbs up to Dr. Kelly Gogel.
Yes.
She's taking care of your fabulous feet.
She has, and she's wonderful.
I think what we're going to add to her commercials at the end, she is feet-tastic. Oh, cut it out. All right. Now, there's another topic I wanted to get to. We're not going to be able to do it thoroughly because we're running short on time. But I'm going to introduce it and we'll expand it next week. This is from San Francisco psychiatrist Dr. John Cruz, who says, quote, people from both parties are freaking out about Donald Trump. It's not just the flurry of executive orders. Trump says Dr. Krauss has ignited a firestorm of disarray, doom, and despair. You guys were talking about that. Rick, go ahead.
This is part of using mental illness as disparaging rhetoric. It began with against Trump with Bandy Lee, and it's just ludicrous. And it's what has made psychiatry the less respected. I hope it becomes less respected field that it is. And sometime we can talk about the insanity plea and that ludicrousness. But the use of mental illness as rhetoric is one of the most irritating, obnoxious, offensive, irrelevant facts in public discourse.
All right, Tonya, go ahead.
Rick, are you suggesting that the last 60 days have not created a tremendous amount of anxiety and emotional distress for vast swaths of the population? Because that's a fact. I can tell you that in my work.
Stop, Rick. Go ahead, Tonya. Finish.
I regularly get calls from people. Obviously, I'm an employment attorney. Employment is an issue that's always relevant. But like the inundation of contacts from people who are distraught, not just regularly dismayed, like most people who have lost their jobs, but who are distraught. It is absolutely, in my anecdotal experience, but also what I'm hearing from all of my friends who are in helping professions. This is absolutely a fact. People are traumatized.
Dr. Krauss says, my patients, family, and friends are asking me for guidance about coping with the next 4 years. I mean, it is pretty chaotic out here.
Let me just say, I support people going to lawyers. I do not support adults going to psychiatrists. This is the weakness of the American society that every time they get upset, Every time they get upset, they want to see a professional. Sometimes these are challenging matters which you take on as adults.
Andrew, according to Dr. Cruz, some of his distressed patients are supporters of Donald Trump, but they are unsettled too by his, quote, inconsistency and poor follow through.
Listen, I think when you are being spun up in the media constantly to be told that the world is ending, you cannot be surprised when folks have their anxiety levels raised as a result of this. I mean, this is what has happened. When Donald Trump gets elected, right? We went through an election cycle where one side was saying to the American people that if you let this guy get elected, it's going to be the end of the world, the end of the world. And then for the last 60 days, every time Donald Trump does something, it is being touted as being the end of the world. This is what it does. And when you get folks in their echo chambers and you get folks being told that they need to get spun up to action and take the streets in revolt and rebellion. And listen, I'll go back and say this, right? Again, we'll do a whataboutism on my side. When you tell people in 2020 that the election was stolen and it's the end of the world if Joe Biden becomes president, you can't be surprised when a bunch of folks show up in Washington, D.C.
All right, Barry,
yeah.
Well, first of all, I don't think the bar graph of the stock market the last couple of days it shows is spinning in the media. Second of all, Dr. Vatz, are you going to use that same argument to those who support the Second Amendment rights and say, oh, it's just a mental illness problem? And third of all, you want this from parents, you want this from teachers, and you want it from the President of the United States. You want a calm, predictable, steady hand at the tiller. And that comes from economists, business leaders all around the world. And that's what people are reacting to. The lack of a steady hand at the till.
15 seconds, Rick. 15.
Yes, there is reason for anxiety. No, there's no reason for professional help for weak Americans to become victims. Everything that happens, they're a victim.
That's offensive. That's offensive to those. That's offensive to people who have real problems and real mental illness. And to say that it doesn't exist and these are just weak people is, if it was a broken arm, you would go to a doctor to have him set it. If there's a chemical imbalance in the brain that it can be corrected, it is a medical situation just like anybody else. And I know that, and you can shake your head all you want and you can disbelieve it all you want, but it's offensive to people who really, really suffer.
No, Rick, Tonya.
Read a little bit of Thomas Zaz, Barry.
Quiet.
Mm-hmm.
It is irresponsible to say that people are weak because they need help, whether it comes in the form of seeing your pastor or going out with your good guy friends or seeing a therapist. People who are in distress should get support. They should not feel weak and isolated. We cannot end on that point. If you are feeling distressed, people who are watching this, get help, talk to friends. It doesn't make you weak. There's strength in getting help.
All right, listen, this was a fabulous, interesting, combative program, but Square Off is growing in audience, and we really appreciate those of you who are following us at squareoff.net or on YouTube at Square Off Show. Andrew, good to have you back from Europe.
Always good.
Rick, always good to have you back with conflict. Barry, nobody meant to offend you. And Tonya, it's always great to see you.
Can I say one quick thing? Understand, I really like Barry. He had a great teacher as a young man.
He did.
Yes.
He did.
Yep.
Thank you, Dr. Vatz, for teaching me all I know.
Yep. Dr. Vatz, Rick Vatz taught Barry Hebrew in the 3rd grade, which is why Barry can only speak English. We'll see you next time when once again we square off. Bye-bye, everybody.
Yeah.